We will get started. Thank you everyone for being here at this CoC training. This is the second of our series for 2026. Every month on the third Thursday at 11 a.m., we will lead a 45-minute training on a different topic. And today's topic is enrollment documentation and participant file expectations. So I'm Wes Bremer, and my colleague, my manager, Megan Thani-Kunath, will be co-presenters today. And before we get started, just a few housekeeping reminders. The training is being recorded, so we will send you the recording and the slides in a follow-up email, along with some other resources. You are encouraged to share your camera, but if not, that's fine too. And Megan and I like questions as they come. So while Megan's presenting, I'll be monitoring the chat and vice versa. So, and if you feel compelled to ask your question aloud, you can raise your virtual hand or your physical hand, and hopefully one of us will see you and acknowledge your question. There'll be time for questions at the end, and we'll also have a feedback survey on how well this training meets your needs. With that, we're going to jump right into the content. Megan's going to begin by explaining how this training connects to the one from last month.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks, Wes, for kicking things off. Just as a reminder, with these monthly trainings, our intention is to structure them as a workflow for moving a client from when you initially have that contact with them through housing them. So last time we discussed, let me see if I can, sorry, there we go. Okay. Last time we discussed CoC participant eligibility. We briefly reviewed the 4 categories of homelessness. We talked about the CoC project types and how they interact with those categories, what's eligible, what's not. We also talked about homelessness documentation, an order of priority of those documents, and we also touched on chronicity and disability verification specific to PSH projects. So that client has been deemed eligible, and now today's discussion is going to be on the enrollment process and all those pieces that happen after they've been deemed eligible. Primary objectives for those folks, the boots on the ground folks doing the hard work, case managers, you should be able by the end of this training to correctly enter a client's project start date in HMIS, summarize key points of a program agreement for your clients that you're working with, and instruct them on where to find and how to follow any grievance policies that your agency is putting out, and distribute necessary forms such as the VAWA forms, and then maintain and organize a complete participant file. We're not going to touch on every single piece of the participant file today. As I mentioned, this is kind of going through the workflow, so this is the initial part. In the next few trainings, we'll talk about, determining a unit eligibility and income verifications, all those fun things that you guys do. Agency leadership. This training is also helpful for you today because we're going to talk about the process of crafting and updating a program agreement and grievance policies, which are requirements by HUD and also protect you and your tenants that you're serving. Quickly, before we get into it, I wanted to show this graphic. Again, we're talking about the workflow. So we're starting with, meeting that individual or family in need. They have completed an access, or their CE access site has completed a chat on them at this point. Based on their chat needs. They have been placed on a prioritization list for a CoC permanent housing project. I did want to make a note here. Documentation gathering process could begin in this phase. So at the same time they are completing the chat, working with that initial point of contact at the CE Access site, documentation can start to be provided. However, it doesn't have to be. You do not have to have all of the clients' eligibility documentation, whether or not they can officially be in permanent housing at that point. I did want to make that clear, but we do encourage it just to smooth this process along. We all know there's a lot that happens between being officially enrolled in a program and that initial touch point. A lot of times folks stay in this loop here between initial touch point and program enrollment because maybe they've moved to a new camp and you're struggling to find them. Maybe they don't have a phone and you're struggling to get in touch. Or maybe they go back and forth on whether they want to be housed regularly or not. Lots of things can happen in that time period. So the more documentation we can gather up front as you're looking towards the program enrollment process, the better, but it's not required before case conferencing. All right, and then after case conferencing, again, this is where we talk about the eligibility requirements that we discussed last month. You're determining eligibility after case conferencing, and they're officially referred to your program. And then after that is when the program enrollment is happening. All right. And I'm going to kick it over to Wes because now we're going to talk about the pieces of how we move forward.
Yeah, and before we move to the next slide, I just want to stress that enrollment is an overwhelming time for clients. They're reeling from the trauma of their housing crisis, and they might be facing domestic violence too. And then enrollment is kind of an avalanche of paperwork, and they're inundated with a lot of information. And you all know this better than I do. So just having that mindfulness throughout the enrollment process, which we know you do, and especially when we get to the program agreement. In a moment, we're going to talk about strategies on making things more accessible and less overwhelming for clients. So we're excited for that segment especially. Okay. Now, I'll start with my asterisks down at the bottom. Enrollment can consist of more than the 4 items you see listed here, but these are our subtopics for today's training. So we'll be seeing this slide a lot. This is kind of our transition slide throughout the training. But we start with HMIS entry assessment. First thing to say is if you already have access to HMIS and/or DV client track, that means you completed the training that IHCDA requires, and you've already been trained on how to do the entry assessment in HMIS. So Megan and I don't aspire to repeat that training here. Wouldn't be a fruitful use of your time. Rather, we're going to get on to a pretty compelling talking point on the next slide. But yeah, the entry assessment for CoC projects consists of 4 parts: HMIS barriers, the universal data, which is the prior living situation mostly. And then you have a domestic violence screening and the financial piece, which is mostly income sources and a little bit of expenses. So you've seen that all ready, and we're not going to rehash that. What we want to spend time on is project start dates. And there's a pretty funny story about this. My colleague Lori Wood just walked by my desk one day and kind of told me about this discussion that the data team was having about project start dates. And it was just very serendipitous because it fit in very well with this training that we were preparing. So thank you to Lori for that. But project start dates are very important. They're the starting point for many of the HMIS metrics. For example, you have a rapid rehousing client, and the person decides to start rapid rehousing January 1st. But they do not move into their apartment unit until February 15th. So we have project start date January 1st, housing move-in date of February 15th. Well, that gap of 45 or 46 days, depending on how you count it, that's called days to housing. And we want the record to reflect that you, as the case manager, spent 45 days assisting that client with housing search and placement. So if you conflate the two, then you're really not telling the most accurate story of how things transpired. So it's seemingly a small thing, but the start date is very impactful for metrics. Okay, so back to Lori and her story. So she shared with the data team and with us by extension the HMIS data standards manual. And HUD gets pretty prescriptive on the rationale for project start dates. For example, here on the left, we have the project types, and on the right, we have the different rationales. So if you're working in a CE or DVCE project, and the start date for that client will be the first date of first contact with the client. Safe haven and transitional housing, it's the date the client moves into the residential project. And rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, it's a little more complex. So you need to consider 3 criteria. Is the client eligible? Secondly, has the client expressed that they want to participate in the project? And then thirdly, are they accessing services, and will they soon have a unit available? HUD uses the term in a reasonably short amount of time, but our data team defines that as within 90 days. So an example might be in order here. Let's pretend you have a PSH applicant, someone who's hoping to participate in that project, but they're currently residing in an emergency shelter. Okay, so they're eligible for PSH, that's established, and they want to be housed in the PSH project. This might be tenant-based PSH, so they would have to search for a unit. But from your regional CE lead, you haven't yet gotten a referral, or there's not yet an opening at your agency for a PSH spot. So the third criterion is not met, right? There has to be, they have to be admitted to the PSH project, and they have hope that they can get into a unit within 90 days. There's a question on what is tenant-based permanent supportive housing. That would be if the client has the opportunity to look for their own unit, and subrecipient and client are contracting with a landlord. Like the client will take out a lease with the landlord, and then the subrecipient will be paying a portion of their rent to the landlord. And actually, Megan has a slide that depicts that coming up here in a minute. So that will be reiterated in a moment. The data team encouraged me to stress that if ever especially this bottom row, it gets a little too nuanced and you want their input, you can reach out to them at hmishelpdesk@ihcda.in.gov. And I'll put that email address in the chat the next time I'm not presenting. And it is in one of our ending slides. So, yep, project start date, not to be confused with housing move-in date. Most times for rapid rehousing and PSH, they will be different. Project start date will be different than the housing move-in date, but there are some circumstances where the two coincide on the same day. So with that, we're going to move over to the program agreement. Megan wants to speak to this triangle of happiness.
Yes, briefly, I call this the triangle of happiness because there are several documents, as Wes mentioned. The program enrollment is an avalanche of documents, and you all know how tough it is to have that big stack of paper and meet with a client and try and make it a good experience for them. So the triangle of happiness is referring to the documents that are in place to protect you, to protect the tenant, and to protect the landlord. So all three parties need to have legal documentation and a mutual shared understanding based on the specific based on their specific role. So the document between the landlord and the tenant is, of course, the lease. The document between you, the agency, and the landlord, usually the RAP or rental assistance payment contract. Technically, the RAP is also between the tenant and client, but this is the main one between you and the landlord. And then what we're going to focus on today is those documents between you, the agency, and the tenant. These are things that protect both you and the tenant to make sure that you have a mutual understanding of what is expected from each side. And I'm calling it the triangle of happiness, and I added a happy little squid in there just to help you remember that these are the things that make sure that you're on the same page, both the client, the tenant, and the landlord. Everyone needs to be aware of what's to come in the program, what's expected of them, and what they can expect from each other.
Great, thank you, Megan. Yeah, so the program agreement really helping the client understand and get started in the project type or the program. So now, what is your approach to going over the program agreement with the client? There could be different approaches. Maybe you carve out time for the client to read the program agreement, or you summarize it for the client. There are different approaches, and we are going to explore kind of like how you as a group are doing it. So we have a poll. I'm going to put the poll in the chat. And then also those of you who had success with the poll last time, you can answer it in the poll feature of this Teams webinar. So the first poll question, again, you'll see it in the chat or in the center of your screen. The client and I, the case manager, we sit down to read the entire program agreement. Is that you never do that? Rarely, sometimes, often, always. And so far, we have 13 responses. Okay. And so a good, we're getting more responses. Sorry, jumping the gun here. Let's take about 10 more seconds for those who are thinking. Okay, right. I'm not sure what you all are seeing, but I made it so that, okay, I'll close the poll. And I believe, let's see. Megan, are you seeing the poll results?
Yes, looks like we've got 41% saying always, 17 often, 29 sometimes, and then 5 rarely, 5 never.
Okay, so this is encouraging. Some of you are making it an always habit, and then others, sometimes. Okay, so there's no value judgment on how you do this, and I say that in all sincerity of heart, and you're going to see that the content we're about to present backs what I just said. Okay, but one other poll. Okay, now kind of the other big option might be to summarize the key points of the program agreement for the client. So please choose how often you summarize the key points of the program agreement.
We did have some issues with the poll last time, so if you aren't able to access the poll, you can always type it in the chat if you want, or remain anonymous. That's fine too. So thanks,
Thank
Cody, for
you.
putting it in there.
Sorry, I forgot to put the second chat or second poll in the chat. Thanks for that reminder. Okay, so yeah, we have 20 responses on this second poll, and about 40% of people are saying they always summarize, 35% saying often. Okay, so both of these approaches are viable for sure, and we're going to we'll come back to the summary part in a moment. I was gonna possibly have some people share like what are the top 2 or 3 key points that they emphasize, but we may get back to that in a moment. All right, so program agreements, it's kind of a balancing act for you. You have a good number of things to keep in mind with how you approach the program agreement. Purposely not bringing up the bullet points yet. Okay, so 4 considerations that come to mind, and sometimes these considerations are competing, other times they overlap quite happily. But one thing to keep in mind is, are we doing what's best for the client? The client should get a good opportunity to engage with the program agreement. Secondly, you all are bound by challenges, right? You have time constraints, resource constraints. The client may be reeling from trauma and may not be that interested in hearing about the program agreement. That's entirely feasible. So with those challenges, how are you going to adapt and react? And then 2 other layers. What do the CoC regulations require? And thirdly, does your agency have guidance on how they want you to approach the program agreement? So here's some reassuring news for you. If you take a deep dive into the regulations, all that the regulations require is that you provide the program participant a written copy of the program rules before assistance begins. The regs do not say that they have to sign it. The regs do not say that they have to understand it. Your only obligation per the regs is to provide them a copy of the rules. Now, obviously, we hope you go farther than that, but this is the minimum expectation. If your agency has a specific policy on how they want you to do the program agreement with clients, then yes, please respect that policy. Megan and I are never going to tell you anything that undermines your internal policy. Okay, provided that the policy conforms with regulations. All right, we'll always encourage you to respect the internal. Now, maybe having the client read the program agreement is not feasible on some occasions. Maybe the person doesn't like to read or is intimidated by long documents. Okay, and maybe sometimes reading isn't the most effective approach. It might be more effective to have like a conversation about the program agreement. So I've already kind of hit upon these, but rather than reading the program agreement in full, you can summarize, give the client a moment to read it, ask some questions to check for comprehension, or you can use section titles to briefly describe every part of the program agreement. So one resource that I wanted to share real quickly is on our website. So this is the CoC webpage on IHCDA's website. That's how you navigate to it. So we've uploaded sample program agreements for PSH, RRH, and TH. And we also have a sample grievance policy that we'll see in a moment. But one of those last techniques that we suggested is, here's your program agreement. And because you have the bolded subheadings, you could quickly see the topic and speak to each of these items. And it could be more of a conversation with the client. Yeah, so that's one of the options for you. Lastly, to finish up on the program agreement, we highly recommend that the client sign the program agreement. This strengthens your documentation. You should keep a copy in the participant's file. And then remember, as we were kind of reading earlier, the client by regulation must receive a copy of the program rules. And for our agency leadership here, we're not going to spend time on these slides, but one way, if you want to revamp your program agreement, one way of organizing it is client rights and responsibility, and then agency responsibilities. And we kind of did some of the pre-writing, like topics that might appear in each of the different project types. We put a coming soon on transitional housing because soon IHCDA in the balance of state CoC, we're going to release new written standards for transitional housing. So I think Megan and I will remove this label when we send out the slides, but know that that resource is coming soon. Megan's going to speak briefly about writing style.
Yeah, very quickly, because we're running a little short on time. I just wanted to highlight, make sure as for those in agency leadership who are drafting these policies, make sure anything that is client facing, whether it's the program agreement, grievance policies, etc., are accessible. So think through your language and writing style. Using section breaks and titles, and those bullet points are always helpful for a quick reference. I know a lot of us, when we're reading like the CFR and the Code of Federal Regulations, it's very much in the lawyer speak. And so sometimes when we're trying to translate that into actual documents that we're using with clients, it's tricky to also not use lawyer speak or, design things in a way that are a little bit confusing. So the feeling that I feel when I'm reading the Code of Federal Regulations, I don't want to have that same feeling when I'm reading a program agreement. While it is kind of a contractual agreement, that doesn't mean it has to be extremely strict contractual language with every word and phrase that you're using. So make sure it's accessible, tone, formatting, all those things. And if you want to work on this with us, we would be happy to review what you have or draft things for you, bounce ideas back and forth. Anytime, reach out to us. We're happy to help.
All right. Thank you, Megan. All right. So moving on to the next topic, grievance policy. This needs to be said real quickly. You have options. So some of you roll the program agreement, grievance policy, and client termination policy into one document. That's fine. I've seen that in monitoring reviews. Or you could have 3 standalone documents. So however you want to go about it. Yeah, so we're kind of going from the grievance policy would be a standalone document. That's our viewpoint. Okay. So grievance and client termination policies. IHCDA requires the grievance policy, whereas client termination is a HUD regulation. There's the citation. We're purposefully not talking about termination because that's the whole topic for November. The two, though, are sister policies. Okay, if we have a little visual here, when we talk grievances, the client is expressing a complaint or concern against you all, the program or homeless response agency. Right? The arrow goes the other way for client termination. And I want to emphasize client termination is an option among others to address clients' infractions or failure to meet program requirements. So, what should appear in your grievance policy? Well, these are all suggestions, but some good considerations are the following. Are clients encouraged to resolve concerns on their own? Do you want to encourage those conflict resolution skills, or would you rather the clients not try that and just go directly to the grievance procedure? It's for you to decide. Who can file grievances? Is this grievance policy limited to clients, or can staff lodge complaints? Traditionally, we've seen it limited to clients, but the other two are acceptable. Who can clients name in grievances? Are they limited to only expressing grievances about staff, or can they express concerns about other clients? And how will the clients go about filing the grievance? You have 3 different options here, and maybe there are more that we didn't think of. Who reviews the grievances? Maybe it's the program director or the housing director. And what is the timeline and procedure for the grievance review? Okay, we expect some prompt resolution, and having timelines or deadlines is helpful in that. And can the client appeal the grievance decision? If this were client termination, I would give a resounding yes, because per regulation, clients can appeal client terminations. But this is really for you to decide if you want to have an appeal to the grievance. And then how do staff document or keep record of the grievances? Like, a copy of the grievance form, is it being placed in the client file? So I want to show you the sample grievance policy we've prepared and speak a little bit about kind of reading styles. So the sample grievance policy we have is 3 pages long. And when some clients see that, they're like, that's too long. I'm not going to read that. And that's a perfectly logical and fair response. However, I would say you want to be detailed and comprehensive in your policy because let's take that same client. He or she or they, the person's outraged at something you or a colleague did, and they remember, oh, can I have a copy of that grievance policy? Suddenly that client has a need to read something. And I bet their attitude toward the policy is going to change. Suddenly they'll love all the details and they know exactly who's going to be reviewing their grievance. Um, and you don't have to adopt any of this. These are just some ideas, but like the program director, if that person is the one to resolve the grievance, maybe that person has to abide by certain principles. And if I was the client upset and I read all parties are given an opportunity to describe the grievance, then I suddenly know, hey, I get a listen from the program director. And this is actually very empowering information. So I just encourage you not to always think that long is bad. I'm not assuming that you think that, but sometimes reference materials, yeah, we can't read them cover to cover when we get them, but when we have a need for them, we're kind of eager to read more, and detailed is good at that moment. So, all right. That's all we had to share about grievance policies. And moving on to the VAWA forms. So VAWA is the Violence Against Women Act, and it speaks of victims or survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Victims is the term that you see in the VAWA legislation and the CoC regulations, but many of your clients may choose to identify as survivors, that they're overcoming their situation. So each term has its place. Just wanted to speak quickly to the terminology. Yeah, and VAWA provides several protections and recourses to action. We'll speak about recourses in November. The protections, though, is that clients cannot be denied assistance solely because they're experiencing domestic violence or one of these three other conditions, and they can't be evicted solely because of that. So during your enrollment, you need to provide your clients two forms. So if ever you want to go on HUD's website and see their forms, there are 5 of them related to VAWA. And you all, during your enrollment, by regulation, there's the regulation, you are required to give clients 5380, which is their notice of occupancy rights. This form, it's a 5-pager. It explains VAWA and the protections they have and how they'll exercise those protections if needed. And then 5382 is the certification form. So to receive VAWA protections, the client has 4 different options for certifying that they're experiencing domestic violence or these other 3, and they have 14 business days to submit this form or one of the 3 other documentation options to your agency. So these forms, not only are they given at enrollment, but if the client is terminated or evicted, the client also needs to receive these 2 forms. So for our agency leadership, please assure that case managers are doing that. And then VAWA also comes into play when we talk about lease execution, the VAWA lease addendum, and there are a lot of VAWA provisions in the WRAP contract as well. And so another topic that we've added to this is participant file expectations. So I'm going to turn it over to Megan to share.
Thanks, Wes. Yeah, so the participant file is a story, right? You're telling the story of what you have worked on with this client, what their goals are, and what has been done so far, where they want to go. Throughout your workflow, make sure that you're consistently tracking the story and proving the good work that you're doing. The point of this participant file is not just to add more paperwork to your already over exorbitant workload. It's really to tell that story to us and our team to make sure that we are covering all of our bases, as well as to HUD when they come in and do their audits. So think of this, the participant file, not only as a burdensome checklist, but more so as a way to tell the story. Make sure you're continuing with case notes. If there's something that is a little bit funky going on, you're like, well, I wasn't able to get the program agreement completely signed when they first sat down with me because they had an emergency and we had to reschedule. So we have half of the paperwork done. Put that in the case note so we just see where it is. If you are doing documentation on paper, making sure things are legible and neat, signing and dating forms when they need to be signed and dated and indicated. And of course, we have it on here as well. When in doubt, ask us. If you have a form that your agency is like, I'm not really sure if this should be in the file or not. Is this something that's required, or is this left over from, many, many generations of case managers or IHCDA staff even have implemented something from the past? Um, give us a shout, and we can walk through what you're currently using and if you need to update anything, and if we need to help you draft anything as well. But remember, always be telling that story with the file. And lastly, we do want to point out that files can be kept in paper. We do really encourage digital files in HMIS or a combination of the two. That is a decision for your agency to make. Make sure you are tracking properly those enrollments, move-in dates, exits, etc. Again, everything that you're tracking is telling the story to continue doing this funding. And now more than ever, with changes that HUD is pushing out, it's really important that we're telling that story. If you do have questions or concerns about something in the file, if you're writing in a case note and still explaining the story, it's also helpful for you to go back and remember it later. I think I would forget my own name if I didn't write it down every once in a while. And so keeping track of those things is really crucial and critical. And always please reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns. And I think that's all we have. I'll turn it back over to Wes, but I think we're about to wrap up.
Great. Yes, thanks, Megan. So, yeah, I want to I'll address Albie's question in the chat in a moment, but just so you all see what's coming your way in the follow-up email, you already have the program agreements and the grievance policy on the website. We're going to send you a checklist for the grievance policy. We've prepared a one-pager of key takeaways. Sometimes it's hard to go through many slides, so we hit the high points for you. And of course, you'll get the slides and the recording of the training. Yeah, so we're going to kind of multitask here in the interest of time. So in the chat, we put a feedback survey. It's 6 questions, and it's anonymous. So we just want to get a feel for like the relevance of the training, the level of engagement. So those are the questions generally. And Also, we're going to open it up to questions. So I'll start with Alvy's, and if anyone else has anything top of mind, feel free to hold your question for a moment. But Alvy asked, the VAWA forms don't need to go into the client file. Is that correct? Yeah, this is a good question, and we'll look at the forms themselves. I have them pulled up. Can do this relatively quickly. Oops. Sorry, screen everyone. Okay. So the first form 5380, it's informational, the notice of occupancy rights. So there's really nothing that it doesn't, you would not put this in the client file. However, 5382, the certification of domestic violence status, if the client is claiming or vouching for the fact that they're experiencing domestic violence, they would complete this form, and this needs to be kept in their client file in a secure way. So this would appear in the client file. Now, the way some subrecipients go about this is, hey, we still want to demonstrate that we gave them the forms because that's what the regulations require, that the forms be given. So some subrecipients have a VAWA acknowledgement form that they have the client sign that they received forms 5380 and 5382. Honestly, I think that's the best approach, and kudos to those subrecipients doing that because they're making it very visible that the client actually received the two forms. So that's the best way I know how to answer Alvy's question. Any other questions? All right, well, we'll stop the recording and stick around for a minute or so in case anyone didn't want to ask a question out loud. But yeah, thank you for your attention to enrollment documentation and the participant file. We encourage you to keep up the good work. I was impressed positively on how you're reading the program agreements with the clients and really giving them a meaningful opportunity to understand the project before beginning it. So thanks again. And our next session will be the third Thursday of May. And have a good day, everyone. Thanks again for your time.